Hi everyone, so today I'm going to do a book review on Eddie S. Glaude Jr.'s Democracy in Black. Before I start the actual book review, I have a small disclaimer. I am biracial, so I'm half black and half white, so sometimes when I say the word we, I'll be talking about white people, and sometimes I'll be talking about black people. I'm going to try really hard to define that every time I say the word we. I just wanted to make that small disclaimer before I started. Another small disclaimer I have to make, I'm getting sort of sick, so my throat hurts really bad, and in some like that. In some instances of the video, my voice will be kind of gravelly. If I think that you can't understand what I'm saying, I'll put the words at the bottom of the screen. Democracy in Black is a nonfiction book about how racism still enslaves the American soul today. Glaude touches on the history of blacks in power, especially Obama and Martin Luther King Jr. He also talks about how we see blacks socially and how there's a value gap, so white lives are valued over black lives. He talks about racial habits, and specifically one racial habit, white fear, that perpetuates that value gap. He writes an introduction and a conclusion and 9 chapters in between that, and in my personal opinion, they break down really easily into 3 distinct parts, and so I named them so that I could talk about them in the video. It would be easier for you guys to follow along. So the first section of the book is how we view blacks socially. So this is where Glaude talks about things like racial habits and white fear and why we see blacks the way we do in our everyday society. The second part of the book is the blacks' history and government. So this is where he talks about like Martin Luther King, Obama. He also talks about black Republicans, black liberals, black post-black liberals, and black Democrats. Part 3 of the book is prep and delivery of the rally cry. This is where he talks about modern day protesting, so he talks about the Ferguson riots and marches that were done in DC and California, places like that. He also said a lot of things that made me realize that our generation is a lot different than generations in the past as far as fighting for black equality. Our generation has realized that there's a lot of intersectionality that has to do within our fight, so we're not only fighting for black equality, but we're fighting for disability equalities, we're fighting for equality for people with disability, we're fighting for equalities for queers, we're fighting for equalities for all of these other groups that just is sort of unprecedented in history, which made me really proud to be a part of this generation and an activist. The conclusion of the book is pretty much just a rally cry for blacks to get kind of hype and excited about the fight again. Personally, some of his statements were so thought-provoking and profound that I found myself literally rocking in my chair as I was reading the book because I was so hype about it. Like, some of his statements just had me pacing back across the floor in my dorm room. I was shouting Black Lives Matter. I was so ready to be out on the streets protesting, to organize marches. I was ready to really kind of get back in the fight and be more active. He structured his book in this way, and I feel it was intended, and it's quite honestly brilliant. What he did was he sectioned the book off so that certain parts of the book are for different intended audiences. So the first and the second part of the book are more geared towards white people because it talks about social aspects. It really calls white people out on actions that they're taking subconsciously and consciously, and it tells them, okay, you guys need to step up and make some conscious effort to change your actions. But the third part of the book is obviously, if it's a rally cry, it's obviously more geared towards blacks. Racism is viewed very differently between the black community and the white community. I mean, we've all heard things like, not to be racist, or I didn't even know racism could still exist in 2017, and blacks can't go a day without acknowledging racism, without experiencing racism, without suffering from racism. So this kind of breaking up of intended audiences forces the reader to see both sides of the story. That was brilliant on Glaude's part because, in my personal opinion, racism is a system that affects everyone. It's very obvious that blacks are more severely affected by racism, definitely, but I think that it affects both sides. Whether you're white and your thoughts about how you view Black people are shaped by people in power who want to keep the value gap alive, or you're Black and you can't get opportunities, you can't get schooling, you can't get places to live, you can't get out of poverty because you don't have the opportunities to do so. There's obviously effects on both sides, and I think Gilad kind of touches on that here by making you read the other side. Not only that, but we can't fix a problem until we acknowledge that it exists, and part of acknowledging it exists is seeing the other side of the story. So by reading this book, you are kind of taking the beginning steps to ending racism simply by reading. One of my favorite aspects of the book is that he proposes actual solid solutions that are logical. So on a more general note, he just suggests that we take the issue back to the government. So he also says that we have to make a change socially. That really hit home with me because I read a lot of books of this nature, and a lot of the authors either propose fixing the government or fixing us socially. They don't see that we really truthfully need both in order to completely and truly eradicate racism. On a more specific note, he suggests a blank ballot idea. So what we would do is we'd go in to vote, but instead of picking one of the two options, we would simply write none of the above or leave the ballot blank. Authors of this genre typically give more general ideas about how to change things, but they don't give actual concrete things you can do, so Gilad really struck me as different when he did that. Normally when I'm reading books of this nature, I kind of prep myself by doing a little bit of research about the author first, but I decided to go in reading this one completely objectively, so I had no idea, I didn't know a single thing about Gilad before I started reading, and so the plan was to do research afterwards to check his credibility, but I never ended up actually doing that because he proved to me in the book that he had credibility. He did this by writing an afterword and a suggested reading. The afterword is basically just describes the people he interviewed, the people whose stories he told. He describes them about a year later when things have kind of changed and the movement is very different. So him writing this afterwards not only showed me his moral standing, but it also proved that he realizes the movement is changing every single day, and that he has to acknowledge that with every new person that comes into the playing field, the movement's different. So I thought that was absolutely amazing. It was very different, something I hadn't read before in books of this genre. The suggested reading was 6 pages front and back of books that he was suggesting for us to read, all on the topic of race. Some of the books in his lists were books that I had read. I mean, they're on my bookshelf right now. And so I had read these books and I thought I was kind of knowledgeable on the topic. Like, I knew by no means I was an expert. I knew there was plenty of things for me to learn, but I felt that I was sort of knowledgeable on the topic. So for me to have read maybe 5 of the books on the list, and me to feel this knowledgeable, for him to have read 6 pages front and back of all of these works, he definitely is knowledgeable. That really drove home how credible he was on this topic. As I said before, I've read books of this nature before, so I kind of already had a background knowledge on it. But even in some instances of the book, specifically in like the history section, I was kind of confused in some of the paragraphs because, quite frankly, Gilad uses very long sentences and some of them have confusing syntax, and he has very intellectual diction. So because of that, I wouldn't really recommend reading this book if this is the first time you've ever picked up a nonfiction book about racism before. I would maybe read a couple others and then come read this one. I definitely still think you should read it. I just don't think this should be your first overall impression of nonfiction books about racism. In case you hadn't gleaned from all the times I've said I love the book so far, I absolutely loved the book. I would definitely recommend it for people who are trying to learn more about race, who kind of already have their toes dipped in the water as far as nonfiction books about race go. I think that his eloquent wording, his profound statements, his thought-provoking statements, they really kind of, obviously they make you think and they make you want to be a part of the movement. They make you really want to make a change within yourself. Not only that, but me and Cloud and I have a lot of similar opinions on topics in the book, so that made it more palatable for me to read. But there were parts of the book that I didn't agree with, that I think he kind of laid out sort of objectively, that really helped me to swallow some of the parts that I didn't like, and I really, really appreciated that. So overall, I would definitely recommend reading this book if you want to know more about how racism enslaves the American soul. Thanks for watching.